And at this point, I am going to hand it over to Catherine Green from CalPro.
Welcome, everybody. We're pleased you're here today. We know from recent attendees at our other Career Pathways webinar that this is a very important topic that a lot of you are working on in your agencies and with your consortia. And today we're pleased to have Jamie Adelson Goldstein help us take a little bit further in looking in our classrooms with how we can help adult English language learners as teachers to develop skill on-ramps to a variety of career pathways. So Jamie's a very popular and polished presenter. I'm sure you'll learn a lot from her today. We will have a recording of today's webinar posted on our video library within the next week. You'll be able to download handouts from there. If you are missing any details, you can always go back and get it and share it with more colleagues. So welcome, everyone, and take it away, Jamie.
Thank you. So I'm delighted to be given this opportunity to work with so many of you with whom I've worked in the past. And I know a number of you are very familiar with the content of today's webinar. So my hope is that that extreme familiarity won't stand in the way of making this useful, but maybe will validate so many of the things you're already doing. The first thing I'd like to find out, and you see you're already doing it, is how you would complete this sentence. So, and I will broadcast the results as they're coming in so that you can see. We are weighted towards the teacher side of things, which is quite terrific since that's really the focus of the workshop today, or the webinar today. Starts with "wa." And Sonia, that's terrific. You could go ahead and still connect in, click on the ESL as well. That would be fine. Okay, it looks like the answers have stopped coming in, so you can see that we are pretty weighted on the teacher side, as I said. We've got about 25 teachers and 7 coordinators, 5 instructional leaders, 4 teacher educators, and 3 other equally important people. I have one more poll to give you before we get right into our goals. Could you complete this sentence? I am blank with contextualizing English language instruction for work and career pathways. And this is stacking up very nicely with the somewhats taking 50%. Ooh, Karen, what a lovely title. I just got a chance to take a look at that. Mary agrees with me. Okay, it looks like we're done answering this. So the majority of us are neatly placed right in the middle, being somewhat familiar. We have about 5 people that are not or not sure whether they are familiar, and we have 8 of you who are going to go through this entire thing saying, I knew that, and that's okay. But hopefully you'll be in a great position to add through the chat pod and through other activities to the knowledge of the group as a whole. Let's take a look at the goals for today. I have highlighted the important words. So by the end of the session, my hope is that you'd be able to explain the relevance of contextualizing instruction for work and career pathways across ESL levels. And contextualizing is kind of a funny term because in California, we've been using that for eons. And we've talked about contextualizing grammar, contextualizing pronunciation, contextualizing instruction, and that has been very much focused on the idea that there is a context for the skills that we are providing or demonstrating or practicing in the classroom. The way contextualizing is being used right now is very much for work and career pathways. And in fact, I'm doing some technical assistance with one state, and the director has asked, that state has asked that I never use the term contextualizing without saying for work and career pathways because the field has thought of contextualizing in a broader sense. And there's nothing wrong with thinking of it in the broader sense, but it is important to know that for our purposes today, we're looking at work and career pathways. Also, we want to look at the correlation then between the contextualization and language development and determine the areas of contextualization that are part of your practice already. And that, I think, is probably the best aspect of any type of webinar like this, is to understand that a lot of what we're being asked to do, especially in terms of contextualizing for work and career pathways, are tweaks rather than complete do-overs. Now, that's not to say that the infrastructure required for career pathways that reach down into English language instruction are more than a tweak. But in terms of what we can do within our lessons to prepare our learners for the types of settings where they are in bridge classes or concurrent classes or IBEST team taught classes, that work that we do is more tweaking than do-over. And last but not least, my hope is that by the time you leave today, you'd be able to infuse one or more career awareness tasks in your lesson. So if you could just take a moment and indicate in the chat pod which one of these, 1, 2, 3, or 4, is most important to you. Just put the number. So explain is 1, ID is 2, determine is 3, infuse is 4. Just go ahead and do that. And as you're doing that, I just would like to point out that this is a classic situation because you'll notice that different goals for different people. And this is one of the major issues that influences how we have approached career readiness in ESL. Because if we know that learners have different goals or different career pathways that they're looking at, it becomes very daunting for us to try to determine how are we going to prepare them without having to individualize to such a great extent. And what I'd like to point out is that we have, as I've mentioned, two luminaries in our midst, Donna Price and Rana Meiji. And Donna has been talking about this for eons. I mean, she started when she was 7, so I'm not saying that she's, you know, gray or anything. But Donna and Rana have also been talking about how we prepare our learners, and it really comes to employability skills. It comes down to giving them the language to demonstrate their ability to tackle all kinds of tasks that are part of the workplace. So again, this is not something that there's an element of rocket science to it, but it's not as rocket science as you might be thinking. Okay, so let's look a little bit at the background, and this will be a short mini lecture. Just as Donna and Rana were very prescient, so were Betsy Parrish and Kimberly Johnson. And one of the things that we want to look at when we look at college and career readiness, and when we specifically look at preparation for work and career pathways, is that the skills we want to impart and develop in our classes are skills that have to go all the way down to beginning literacy. We're not saying that learners have to wait until they're in high intermediate. And I know, having been in this field a very long time, that we did talk about career readiness at high intermediate levels and bridge classes at advanced levels. But we really need to be thinking all the way across the spectrum. So I've given you an interpretation of contextualization. Take a moment and see if you can recall. Yes, Gretchen, I'm sorry, I missed that. Donna has the interview with someone. That if you can recall what I said it was, and then match it up with this. Now, two things I did not mention were the idea that instruction is offered in a supportive environment and the use of authentic materials. So the key is providing language and literacy services contextualized to the skill demands of work or a career in technical training. But the add-on is that it's done in a very scaffolded way, supported, and the materials that learners are using are adapted authentic or fully authentic materials. When we talk about career pathways and their connection to WIOA, the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, that support actually comes along through counseling services that are offered as part of the infrastructure of the program. And I'm not focusing on that with this session, but I know some of you were probably at Heides Bruck-Wrigley's session a couple of weeks ago, and I'm offering, again, links to materials that will talk specifically to the connection with WIOA. So a career pathway, just to make sure that as I say this all the time, it makes sense. A career pathway is a sequence of training steps. And it is possible there's stacked credentials with those training steps. And a lot of times our learners do not have a sense of what steps are on a career pathway. And they think, well, I was a doctor in my country, I want to be a doctor here. And that process is maybe too long of a process for someone who's here and middle age. So knowing what additional steps there are on the way to being a doctor or pharmacist or teacher or any number, construction worker, knowing all the steps would allow a student looking at a goal to say, what are the goals I can achieve in the interim to reaching this other career goal that I have in mind? And I think, the why for all of this comes down to a lovely report Vice President Biden wrote, I think with a little help. And if you want a lot more information about this, Haida's research brief, which is available on the Links ESL Pro site, which I have a link for a little bit later, gives you a lot more insight into the connection between the data that we have about the immigrant workforce and the low-skilled workforce not being able to manage a family sustaining wage, and the fact that we need to be, this is true for non-native speakers as well, but we really need to help our population attain a family sustaining wage. So one of the challenges of all this, and I imagine you recognize exactly this situation, and we've faced it in California for a long time, but it's changing, is that we've been siloed. And now we're looking at fixing that. And I think it was Yesenia maybe, or Carol, I can't remember who said she's an ESL CTE teacher, that we are looking at merging these areas. Some of you, because you've been talking about this for a while, have probably come across some of these statements. And this is a little bit of the pushback. We're hearing that with college and career readiness, life skills is, we need to put life skills in one bucket, but we really need to make sure that we're providing college and career readiness skills as well. And the pushback is teaching life skills is essential for our learners. Or the idea that how are we going to do this at a beginning level when students need to be in an advanced level before they can participate in work or career preparation classes. And then that comes a lot from CTE. And then the other issue is someone saying, we have to be experts in the content we present. And so in order to effectively integrate basic skills and employment skills, that means I have to be an expert in CTE. And I have some answers to those, which I think you might have suspected. So if we go with the life skills being essential, I would counter that employability skills are life skills. And the ability for a learner to identify the career pathways that will help them achieve a sustainable family wage is essential. The concept that students need to be in an advanced level before they can work in or take part in preparation classes. All students can participate in classes that are contextualized for work or career preparation. It's just a matter of the materials and the scaffolding. And last but not least, and this is one that I think is very important for us to consider as we move along, when we get a little frisson of tension because we can't be experts in every CTE area, and how are we supposed to know all of the details about different jobs that might be in industries that might be in California and good for our learners? We really have to remember that this is our bailiwick. Our expertise is in English language acquisition. So what we do is we apply our expertise to the ready-made content. We look at the authentic materials and say, how could we teach that? We help our students do short-term research projects, and by short-term I mean very short-term, within a lesson or two, research projects on particular industries that are of interest to them. We guide their exploration, and at the same time we're learning alongside them. but we're helping them with the language they need to do this. Because it's really a matter of time. Our learners do not have the time to go through 4 years of English language life skills development and then go into college and career readiness training. That we need to be doing this together. And it's a matter of having access to jobs that pay a family-sustaining wage, are middle skill, and these jobs will require some post-secondary education, but generally not a 4-year degree. Now, moving down the career pathway or moving up the career pathway, that would not be true. They would need the 4-year degree, but at least initially. So we know if they're going to require post-secondary education and training, the learners are going to need reading and writing skills that are greater than what they currently have when they leave our programs. So, to sum up, contextualizing instruction for work and career pathways begins with language and literacy. We match the skill demands of worker training in a supportive environment with authentic materials. And lest you be feeling just a little at the moment, I thought an uplifting thought along the way. I'll just let you read that. And this is something that I always advise teachers to share with their learners because I always want to make the point that we're not teaching our learners problem-solving skills. We're not teaching our learners soft skills. We're teaching them the language to demonstrate the skills they have. Now, that's not to say that there aren't cross-cultural differences between soft skills in one culture and another, and in that case, there is some education going on. But it's not devaluing what the learner's skills are. It's, again, providing them with insight, a lens through which to look at those skills through their life in the U.S. So what are the needs? This is at the heart of contextualized English language instruction. The credentials required by the employer, that aspect is knowing what it is that a learner needs to have to move into a particular trade or job position or even onto a career pathway. So that's something we have to make sure we understand. But everything else, again, this isn't new. It's shifting our focus and making sure that we contextualize for this, but it's also making sure that we're, again, really providing the language strategies and skills that learners are going to need to be able to function in a family-sustaining job. So this is what we're going to really talk about for the rest and work with for the rest of the session. There are these various aspects, the soft skills repertoire, the critical thinking, communication skills, career awareness, self-exploration, and career exploration. In addition, there are 5 general areas that Haida Sprakrigli and I worked on together for the ESL Pro, the Links project. And these 5 areas really give us a framework as we're developing lessons to look at. And so I would say that we can help all of our learners identify future pathways, develop language learning strategies, build vocabulary for work and training, demonstrate soft skills, and demonstrate problem solving. So take just a moment before we go on to the next step and see if you have any questions about what you've seen and heard so far. And feel free to pop that into the chat. And if you have no questions, why don't you give me a check mark, an agree, in the, this goes under the little man with the raised hand. You just give me an agree, tell me that you're ready to move on. I made you raise your hand. What I meant to say is that the agree is under the raised hand. I'm hoping that the raised hand just means that you met the check. But Donna, if you have a question, or Lynn, if you have a question, go ahead and pop it into the chat pod. Okay, I see that Anne is still typing. I want to make sure, Anne, you have enough time to ask your question. I'm going to move. Okay, terrific. Yes. All you would need to do, Anne, in the future is go you I do see you on here. So all you would need to do is go to the little man with the raised hand. There's a downward facing triangle next to him. And you click on that downward facing triangle and then you see a variety of commands and emoticons and then an agree, disagree. Okay, Emma, what's your question? While Emma's typing, I'm going to go. We're not going to, well, actually, I better wait. I realize I don't think I have that chat. Right, Emma, I did say that students have soft skills, and it's not so much that we're not teaching the soft. What I'm saying is that we don't have to teach students how to be polite, the concept of being polite. But what we have to be able to teach the student is the English language phrases that indicate one is being polite. And you're exactly right, Emma. They could be culturally based. So that's where I said there are cross cultural issues that would come up. So, what might be considered polite, both verbally and in body language, might not be considered polite in the US, but be considered polite in another country. So, then we do want to set up that contrast. But we're not saying that the concept of being polite is something that we have to teach. Yes, an example is teamwork. Exactly. Thank you for your question. So what I'm going to do now is I have a burning questions pod over here because I want to make sure that if you have a question as we're going along, you can put that in here. But I have, in order for us to get through this material, and this is actually, let's go back to the beginning. I don't have room for a chat pod. So if you want to talk to individually to each other, you'd have to wait for uh, the next setup. So this is the Occupational Outlook Handbook set of career groups, and they're also called career clusters. And this is a great place to start if we're talking about helping learners identify future pathways. You notice that this is pretty high-end vocabulary. So some of what we'd want to do is find out whether learners have any of this language and maybe simplify the language for lower level learners, but certainly at the intermediate level, start considering that some of this language is language that would be very meaningful and in some cases is actually academic language. So once you reflect for 30 seconds, because that's how much time we really should all reflect, is how could you make use of the career clusters in your teaching? And one of the things we're going to do right now is see a way to make use of the career clusters. But still, go ahead and think about it. So, in order to build career awareness, I would have my students go to different cluster areas around the room. So, in this case, it's farming, fishing, and forestry. And I would ask them when they were in their corners or in their section or in their teams, even to brainstorm jobs associated with that cluster. Would I want them to look these up? Absolutely. If they wanted to use resources, I would say 100% yes. Now, in this case, if they were writing on a tear sheet, I'd want them not to duplicate the jobs that they saw their colleagues writing or their classmates. And then from there, they would work with picking one of the jobs that from their cluster, and then they would use scaffolded sentences or sentence frames to write about the job that they'd chosen. So let's give that a try. Let's see how I can best do this. I have to hide this puppy. Carol, that's a good question. And Eric, you're right. That's exactly right. So Carol, the brainstorming, what I saw happen, I was just in Maine and I saw this happening. Um, One of the things that they did is they translated the word using their smartphones, or the teacher put up Google Images for that particular cluster, and the learners then had some ideas of the types of jobs that would be part of that. This was a low beginning class. Oh, absolutely, Vicki. And in fact, all of this is in the handout. So Vicki's asking about the PowerPoint, but the PowerPoint definitely will come your way. So what I need right now, I see that Lynn and Nancy have volunteered. So Nancy's doing aerospace and Lynn is doing transportation. I need 4 more volunteers. I need somebody to hop into media, someone to hop into hospitality and tourism, someone for manufacturing, and someone for sales. We're only going to watch these 4 people brainstorm. I think it's a little easier. Thank you, Carolyn. So Lynn, just keep going. Type as many as you can think of. Because, thank you, Gretchen. What you would really want to have happen is have the learners take turns brainstorming. But because we're in this environment and there are 45 of you, sometimes the technology gets a little crazy if I have you all choose and brainstorm it. Although it does look like some of you are doing that anyway. Oh well, flexibility is an important characteristic for a professional development person. So we don't have anybody in manufacturing. Would anyone like to? Thomas, thank you so much. So what you see happening now is some very interesting things. Political pundit. That's not a job that you would normally associate right away with media, but you don't know what language your learners already possess. So it's a really good idea to be able to look at these. And then other things you're going to notice as you're going through is that if I just look at media and communication, I see categories here. I see some things that have to do specifically with entertainment and some things that have to do with news or politics. So there are a lot of different things that can happen. Now, it's really, really possible, as Carol mentioned, that this type of activity, especially at low levels, is going to require first language. But as long as the students are translating into, that's not an issue. Let them look up the word they already know. And there's a lot of research that says this is absolutely cool for vocabulary development. Look up the word they already know and then provide it in English. Okay, you've done a wonderful job. Now what I want you to do, okay, I'm going to do away with the burning questions for just a minute. And I'm going to ask you to look at, I want you to just mentally pick one of these, each of you, in not just the volunteers, but all of you. I want you to pick one of these careers. I'm going to give you 30 seconds to do that. You might want to just write it down so you remember, because if you're like me, you could completely forget. Love event planner in there. Now see, Liz and Monica doubled up on event planner. Okay, I hope you have your job. So now the next thing you're going to do is look at, sorry, I'm taking a moment to find it. Sorry, guys. Just take a moment. I'm giving you lots of time to choose your, here we go. It's called Brainstorm Slides. Okay, so what I want you to do is to pick sentence number 4, and I want you to picture your job, and I want you to see if you can come up with sentence number 4. talking about your job. They usually blank. You can see that there's a lot of other language in sentence 1, 2, 3, and 4, but let's just work with 4. And I see that they usually stock shelves, they usually work with people. Karen went for the short phrase, fly planes, but that's the insert, so that's perfect. They usually clean houses. What you're seeing here is actually what you would want to do before you provided this activity for your learners, because you'd want a sense of the kinds of verbs that would come up for learners with a particular cluster. Now, at the higher levels, maybe even intermediate, low, intermediate, and above, you wouldn't necessarily have to anticipate this. You would just be available for learners if they had questions and they could do their own research. But at the lower level, you might want to have some examples. And Rana, that sentence would probably also go for number 3, right? Because you've got 2 tools there. Well, may I just say that you've done an exquisite job. Those of you that were able to type in the time frame, and I know sometimes the um, Adobe Connect kind of pushes you out, but you've done an excellent job of immediately coming up with the language and not terribly high language to describe these different jobs. I hope you can see that something like this, where the learners start from different job clusters or different occupational clusters and move through a brainstorm and into a set of sentence frames, really gives them a lot of work with language, but also a lot of opportunities then to apply, well, who else works with, or who else uses these tools? And as I think Chris pointed out very early on in the burning questions, knowing the tools, knowing the tasks they are important pieces in the job search, because as we'll see with a couple of the websites, if you know the tools you want to use, you can look for jobs that are related to those tools. So great work, everybody. So beyond going, so now we're back in our chat. So, oops, lovely how it decides it wants its own thing. Okay. So part of identifying future pathways is, of course, building career awareness, but the other part is goal setting. And it's really challenging to set goals if you don't know really where you're headed. And I'm sure almost all of us would be in a position of saying, uh, my students have told me they want to learn English, or they want to learn conversation, or they want to learn grammar. But we keep wanting to drill down to, what do you want to learn it for? Because that actually is intimately tied to their persistence and their motivation and their general enjoyment of the course. So something as simple as this, asking the students to complete this type of a statement. And of course, for lower levels, you want a lot more visual support. LA Unified, I know in their curriculum and course outlines, they have a picture-based goal setting tool. A lot of other places do as well. I happen to be intimately involved with the Oxford Picture Dictionary. That makes it very easy for learners to flip through the pages and stick post-its where they see something that is of interest to them, or it has to do with these types of statements. And there are other picture dictionaries out there as well. This is another type of goal setting tool that's very helpful for learners, but it's very hard to fill out. So just maybe starting with the idea that by the end of this week, you'll be able to complete this statement or these statements, giving the learners an idea of where we're going and why. An important thing to do, though, in the process is to know what the top industries are in your area. And I just found this yesterday. Um, Actually, the six little pods that you worked on, that you brainstormed, those are 6 industries that are the top industries in California. But notice that retail and wholesale trade, which we had, hospitality and tourism, which we had, but we didn't have personal and business support services. And that is central to the Central Valley. So it's really easy. The internet has made life open up on this level, that we can find the local industries that would have jobs for our learners, and maybe jobs where they can start out, or jobs where they can places where they can do informational interviews to find out if it's an industry of interest to them. Now, in terms of infusing career exploration, I don't think there is a better site for us, or for our learners, frankly, than the Occupational Outlook Handbook, because the handbook has hundreds of occupations. They give really wonderful short narratives on each occupation. They summarize, they say what they do, they give the work environment, they explain the job outlook and give the pay. In working from that, I can pull out information and I can give something to partner A and have him or her dictate to partner B. So that becomes an opportunity for the student to use information in a listening and speaking activity that's contextualized for workplace and career pathways. This is something that we do all the time in class. We do peer dictations, but we can pull them from job profiles. And then at the end, the learners have all these different job profiles that they can then discuss, and they can compare and contrast. If you're wondering about how you can infuse, because we're just doing, just a surface, touching the surface of this, in your handout, I gave you something that Lennox McLennan has developed. I adapted a little bit, but it's a career infusion checklist. And it says, if you want to do this, try this. It gives you a lot of ideas. So I'm all about checklists because I'm very busy and I forget to do things. So if I have a checklist, I'm less likely to forget that in my lesson planning. We can also help all English learners develop language learning strategies. And you can see that this is going on. You've got your basic 4 skills, integrated 4 skills, and then you have your support skills of pronunciation, spelling, vocabulary, and grammar. And this is our bread and butter. So here are some ways that you can work with language learning strategies in a contextualized way. Listening and speaking includes vocabulary and grammar, and it includes pronunciation. So if we have learners do note taking, and this is something that Betsy Parrish is really focusing on a lot in some of the workshops that she's been doing. The Minnesota did research with community college and found that learners were coming in with no note taking skills. We know that for career training, note taking is critical. So having learners have an opportunity to take notes. And how are we going to do that with a low-level student? Yes, Emma, ONET is terrific. I'm sorry, I'm interrupting myself to say that ONET is terrific, but it is much denser for learners to navigate. And I'm going to show in a minute. I like ONET very much, and they have great videos. So the note taking is key. Clarifying, very important. Having learners work with surveys and interviews and peer dictation and practicing clarification strategies, and just the ability to form questions, which we know is very important in the workplace and in training. So going back to that, the site that I just was talking to you about, the Occupational Outlook Handbook, they have summary charts, and you can use these charts to create infogaps. And in case you don't know, OTJT is on the job training. So moving from this to this is not as difficult as coming up with this stuff out of our heads. We have this material. This is where the authentic material is a real blessing. For reading and writing, we know that vocabulary and grammar is part of that process, and spelling is also in there. So if we have learners read charts and graphs with job data and discuss that, we're really contextualizing. We're also really building their career and college and career readiness skills. In terms of developing reading strategies, we can have them read job profiles and bios. We can certainly have them do research by scanning the Department of Labor. See, there's ONET, Emma, and employment websites, and have them do research on that basis. Having them write short reports on jobs and career goals. And this is something very similar to something that Rana and Donna do quite a lot, which is having them use paragraph frames in order to develop their research report based on what they have done, either using ONET or the Occupational Outlook Handbook or those employment websites. Carolyn, the work on Betsy Parrish that you can find is on the links ESL Pro, and there is a link to that. Exactly, Thomas. So Thomas puts this process enables the learner to think beyond jobs and careers. That's actually the point I was going to go to, which is that the language skills we're developing are applicable across contexts. We want to help our learners be engaged citizens and engaged community members. And what they're learning to do here applies to all of those contexts. It certainly applies to them helping their children with their homework. We can also help the learners build vocabulary for work and training. And there is an entire gamut of vocabulary that that our learners need access to, and not all of it is job specific. A lot of it is academic language that allows them to navigate texts of increasing complexity, which we know about through the CCRS. And again, Links ESL Pro has a lot on this. We need the professional language and the sub-technical, and I think Haida may have spoken to this in her webinar, something like cardiac arrest, which most native speakers in the United States would understand in a heartbeat, is sub-technical language and might not be known. The term blueprint, there's language that we would assume knowledge of that isn't readily available to our learners. So we need to have an overarching picture. And one of the things that I wanted to focus on is the idea of academic language as part of career pathways and workforce preparation. I really like Zweier's quote about what it is. I'll give you a minute to look. But I adore Robin Scarcella's quote, which is that it's the language used in the classroom and workplace, the language of text, the language of assessments, the language of academic success, and the language of power. And that, for me, is one of the most inspiring reasons to think about developing learners' vocabulary around workplace and careers. Because the academic language that's part of the training vocabulary, that's part of any complex reading, really enables our learners to have a position of power versus not. That's pretty simply said. So what does it mean to know a word? Take a moment and indicate in the chat pod, sorry for that noise, but indicate in the chat pod one thing you know it takes to mean a word. One thing it takes to know a word. Right, Gretchen. So yours and Virginia's take on this is that what it takes, the amount of time or the situation required to know a word, but what does it mean to know it, to really understand it? So as you're working, you can compare your list to mine. So the first thing is, of course, to know the meaning, but also to know its connotation, the degree, hot versus inferno, or heat versus inferno, associations, to know the written form, the spoken form, collocations, both the fixed phrase and prepositional use. I would say collocations are critical for our learners, especially in terms of the workforce. So when you teach a word, teach its collocation within the context of the way you're teaching the word. Teach the words that ride along. The grammatical features, we need to know these elements of the word. The affixes, the frequency, and the register. Register, again, very, very important for knowing how to use a word in the workplace or in academic settings or in the community. So we are spending more time on vocabulary. We're getting the idea, I think, in our field that we can't just hope that the vocabulary will float down over our learners and they'll pick it up. But we do need explicit, uh, structured vocabulary instruction. That was structure instruction, kind of annoying, but we need this. And one of the ways that we can do that is by paying attention to learning strategy, vocabulary learning strategies. And these are 5 that are identified by Norbert Schmidt. And if you just look at this simplistic view of it, the idea of helping our learners know how to determine the meaning, encouraging them to ask for the meaning, helping them picture and use mnemonics, even even text to help recall the meaning, helping them practice, 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 as you said, um, and helping them own it by having them keep vocabulary notebooks, by having them be vocabulary learners. Make sure that that is part and parcel of their job in the classroom. And Chris, I agree with you. CALPRO are very useful for that. One of the things I like to do is help learners see word families, and I use these little close exercises. So in this case, it's, when you hear a new word at work, you can ask a coworker to, what do you think? What's the word that would go in there? Exactly. You can define it for you. You can also look up and explain would work, right? So what I would do in order for this to work out well is I would say that the word family, it's the word family for define. And define is actually an academic, it's on the academic word list. So that's an opportunity for learners to get exposure to the academic word list. And it's really great if you can do it in a workplace context. Okay, I've got to be honest, this is my favorite part of the whole thing. Problem solving is a close second. But the ability to demonstrate soft skills is key for learners' success. It's actually what the industry, the United States employers that were 100 of them were interviewed of the top businesses, and soft skills came out as the #1 thing they want from their employees. They can teach the hard skills, they can teach the technical skills, they can't teach the soft skills. So it becomes part of what do you say, what do you do, which is a do say chart. So what do you think? Looking at these, which of these happen in your classroom? Which characteristics do your learners present? Which skills do you develop? That's nice, Vicki. That's terrific. Well, let's take a moment. I see that you are. And I'm going to give you a little poll. So I want you to complete this sentence. The most effective ESL, oh, THERs, should be teachers, sorry, are, I want you to pick the top 3. Okay, it looks like flexibility, adaptability is winning, along with collaboration and very bad pastient. This is what happens when I type without my glasses. Oh, Janet, nice plug for Standout. I don't think Rob's on or Stacy are on the webinar, but we'll want to make sure that they get that information. Okay, so right now it looks like the winners are the top Uh, top characteristic is flexibility or adaptability, collaborative skills, and patience. Those were the top. But this is a divergent, uh, no right answer type of question. Now, what I would do with college and career readiness standards at my back is I would ask the learners, or in this case, our participants, and you're not being asked to do this, to defend their statement. What situations? Why is this true? How do you know? So I would go further. I would go beyond this. But this is an opportunity. This is an example of a very simple task that you can do, where you ask the students. Now, of course, if they don't know what the words mean, then you can't do this yet. But you could teach 3 of these, and then you could have them rate which ones are most important for a certain type of employee. I mentioned do-say charts. So do-say chart is something that you can put up. It's from cooperative learning. Spencer Kagan talked about this for many, many years. And the idea of helping learners understand what the behaviors are that are associated with certain soft skills and what the language is. So when you want to clarify instructions, what's something that you do physically when you want to clarify? You want to demonstrate that you want to clarify. Anybody have an idea? I see that Thomas is typing, so I'll wait. And Chris, multiple attendees. Okay, that's true. Um, the do is actually the physicality. So raised eyebrows, raise your eyebrows. Now, what do you say is, can you give me an example? That would be, sorry, let me push that over. It's not lining up, but you understand the idea, I think. So that you're putting it within a chart so that the students are seeing the physical behaviors and the language. What? Very, very appropriate. Look quizzical. And then you might want to, for that one, Yvonne, you might want to actually draw a little picture of someone looking quizzical. So you're coming up with a lot of good ideas. And what you'd want to do ahead of time is set these up for yourself. Set up a little do say chart for yourself. Have 2 or 3 that you really want, 2 or 3 items in each column. And you don't say column here, but there is a column. that you would want to make sure the students took away. Then you could elicit from the learners. And so let's say you're in a low beginning class and the learner raises their shoulders or tilts their head to the side as a demonstration of what you do. Then you would provide them with that language, or do a simple drawing. Scrunching up your face is a perfect one. You can also pull images from Google and pop those into the chart as well. We've come a long way in the 21st century from the way we used to do it. So the process that's happening here is that you're making something that's not terribly concrete, very concrete for the learner. You're giving them the physicality of the soft skill and you're giving them the language that they can use. And I know that many of you have witnessed that when you do this with your learners, they don't just do it for one team assignment. They do it for multiple team assignments. Team tasks. So we want to make sure that learners understand what soft skills are and the idea that what the difference is between hard skills and soft skills. Another thing I would like to point out quickly is this is great for I have and I am, by the way. That's a great opportunity to give that little grammar point. This was something that I had mentioned to you earlier, that the soft skills that were identified as more critical and lacking in employees than others. So these were the 3. However, it's very interesting that different industries identify different skills as well. And I think you might find this kind of interesting. And Nancy, thanks for pointing out that EL Civics has a soft skills employment unit. One of the ways that we can, again, make this very ephemeral element more concrete is to provide formative assessment based on learners' use of the soft skills. So giving them an opportunity to use a checklist, what skills did they use today? Or providing them with a rubric. And I want to point out that a formative assessment does not have, it doesn't shut the learner down and saying didn't meet the skills. It always indicates that skills are being developed or that an attempt is being made, so that you're not saying you didn't do this today. You're saying you're working on it. Okay, and that's an important aspect of formative assessment versus summative assessment. So I gave you in the handout a number of different rubrics that you might use for teamwork, one for brainstorming, I think, and one for problem solving. But this is also a wonderful tool, certainly at intermediate level, to have the learners develop their own rubric of what they think should go into a project or a task. And if they've had examples, then they'll have had a model. And finally, we can help all of our learners demonstrate problem solving. And I don't know if Haida mentioned this to you, I can't recall, but she's got wonderful material in her literacy work website, Literacy Works, I think. On her Literacy Work website, she has some terrific problem solving materials, and there are problem solving materials in your handout that I gave you, a lot of different scenarios, and we're not going to go into all those scenarios today because we have to end soon. But I do want to point out that there is a process. It's a very important process that you do not forget to identify consequences. That's why it's in the center. You might brainstorm solutions, but it's really key for the problem solving to be effective that you need to identify the consequences of those solutions so that then they're making an informed choice of solutions to apply. And in your handout, I gave you a template of a problem solving for the workplace task that you could go through with your learners. So those 5 areas that we just talked about were the idea of identifying future pathways. I'll go back to it actually. Well, identifying future pathways and working with language learning strategies through the 4 skills, looking at vocabulary for career training, also with an eye to academic vocabulary, looking at the soft skills, and then looking at problem solving. So let's just do a really, really fast. Oops. Okay. Click true or false. Really fast evaluation. Career pathways and contextualized instruction are synonymous. Vicki, we'll be putting the PowerPoint will be available through CalPro. We'll figure out how to let you know that because it's too heavy to send through email. Okay, it is false. They are not synonymous. They are connected, but career pathways are different than contextualized instruction. A career pathway is a set of steps to a career, generally stepped out stages with stackable certificates, and contextualized instruction is infusing career awareness, developing learners' employability skills, helping them acquire the information they need to identify a future pathway. That's all contextualized instruction. Let's try it again. For a new one, not the same one. So the skills adult English learners develop in contextualized ESL lessons are applicable to workplace and post-secondary educational settings. And that is true. I can see that all of you have marked that as true. So let's just go through this next one without your having to vote. This one would be a resounding false because we do not have to be intimately acquainted with their course books and content. It's a blessing if we have a CTE instructor at our site and we can talk to them, but We can also look at the material, limit the material that we look at, and use our English language acquisition skills to help make that material accessible. And we have the internet, Chris, exactly. And then last but not least, this is true. Adult English language learners may not know about the steps on a career pathway, and so they benefit from lessons that develop career awareness. Yep, this is where I'm going. So I'm very grateful for your time and staying over an additional 2 minutes. I hope that you found the material to be useful. We will make the PowerPoint available and the recording available as well. Jennifer's letting you know where you'll be able to download the materials. And allow me to share my Bitmojis with you. I thank you very much for your time, and I wish you a smooth path through the weekend.
Thank you so much, Jamie. If we can all turn our check marks into applause, because this was a fantastic webinar. And I'm going to be closing out the meeting in just a moment. Please go on to fill out the evaluation, which will be in a pop-up window on the end at the end of this webinar when we close it out. If you wish to receive a certificate of attendance for this, please email me at jaldridge@air.org, and I will put that in the chat as well. And thank you all so much for attending, and have a wonderful weekend.
I recognize so many of you as you're saying goodbye. I didn't get to see all of you because the attendee list got too full.